Hey, all you evangelists out there, excited about this week with evangelism and discipleship. We haven't been talking too much about discipleship because we've been trying to nail down some of the more evangelistic aspects of the whole process. And really, what I've discovered, as I've heard I've read some comments that you're sending back, I've discovered that the actual process of learning how to share the gospel is probably more important at this point than really incorporating the whole idea of discipleship. So that's why I keep hitting the 3-story evangelism and the 4 points or the 5 points or whatever the points you have, but basically trying to develop your style, the flow, the way that when you start talking to somebody, you can quickly go back to say, okay, well, why don't we go with this? And I think that's super important because this week we've been digging into some really important nuances of sharing your faith, like defining the problem, that people are going to have objections to the gospel message. They're going to have instant kind of difficulties with Christianity. Like, for example, some of the things that were brought up in questioning evangelism were the idea that how can you be so arrogant to say that there's only one way? That's a huge question, and that's it's not even just a question. It's more of a statement that I don't think people are prepared for an answer for. How can you say that there's only one way? And I think a lot of times what I come down to on that is that, well, regardless of what you say, regardless of where we're coming from on this particular issue, there's always going to be a way, right? So, for example, if I were to say, well, there's only one way and it's Jesus, and someone disagrees with that and says, well, no, it can't be that way. That's so arrogant. That's so closed-minded. There are many ways. Okay, well, now that becomes the only way. Because you can't have both at the same time. And you can't have 3 of them at the same time. You can't have the person that says everybody's open. You can't have the person that say it's exclusive, it's just Jesus. And then you can't have the person that says, well, there's nothing. Everything goes black. So at that point, now you got disagreement with all of them. So everybody's going to have one particular view on something. And so I try to reason that regardless of where you come at, the whole idea of what happens after we die, everybody's going to have a certain amount of exclusivity. So if I were to come up to you and say, well, there's lots of paths, and I want you to find the path, and you'd say, great, I'm so glad. Thank you for not being so exclusive. What would be my next comment? My next comment would be, so which path are you going to take? Oh, what do you mean? Well, where are you at right now? Are you ready to pursue Islam? Are you ready to, ascend to Buddha consciousness? Like, how are you going to do it? And then at that point you'd say, well, I don't want to do it. Well, you can't do anything. You got to do something. Now I become exclusive, Or if I were to go up to somebody and say, well, there's nothing. What do you mean there's nothing? When you die, you die. It's just black. A person who believes that all the ways lead to heaven and a person that believes that there's nothing can't get along. So now you got an exclusive problem. Now the person that's an atheist is an exclusive. Like, nope, can't be anything else. So everybody's got an opinion. Okay, so I just say, look, I'm just telling you, from my perspective, this is the truth. And so if you're saying that many paths lead to heaven, that might be your truth as well. I'd love to hear your truth. But I want to share with you what I know to be true. So it's not arrogant so much. It is just the way I understand it. I love how what he brought up next was the whole morality thing, because usually it really does head in that direction. A lot of times people, when I kind of talk to them about that, and get out of that trap of like, well, how can you be so arrogant? Be like, okay, well, I think we're all just trying. We're all following the good Lord. The good Lord's just trying to look out for all of us, and I'm just trying to live a good life. Or you get the person that says, man, Christians are so judgmental, and so they don't want to get into anything because they just feel so scarred and jaded by people. And then you have a variation on the exclusive argument. It's like, well, how could a loving God send people to hell? In which I always love to kind of trot out, well, I don't know if he's so much sending people there as we are headed there ourselves. And we'll talk more about that on Friday, so that should be a good one. If you can make it, that'd be awesome. And of course, the current events that we have that kind of fill our headlines about the homosexual agenda, or maybe the transgender issue and problems, social problems that we have, those are always, in some ways, landmines, that you've got to be really super careful about, and kind of come up with some wording on at least have a pre-thought out response, or at least an idea of what you want to say, and we'll talk more about that on Friday. And then the authority of the Bible is probably a big one. Now, what's funny is that it's not as much as it used to be. I find that the authority question about the Bible really isn't that important as much anymore, because more and more feeling is a legitimate form of knowledge for a lot of people. And so you might have all this stuff ready to talk about how the Bible is very authoritative and truthful, and look at all the copies, and what about the ancient manuscripts, and people just kind of glaze over, and they don't care as much about that part about it. So lots to think through. Lots to talk about. But all of that stuff has to do with once you actually present. And I think it all comes back to what we've been talking about over these last several weeks. And I'm going to hit it. I'm just going to bang it like a drum. You have to have a framework. And the framework has to have something that is able to anticipate where are we and where do we want to be. So on the one hand, you want to be able to engage with people. And I think one of the best ways to engage with people is say, well, tell me, what do you think? What do you think happens when we die? Or what's been your experience growing up? Like, were you part of the church, not part of the church? What was your religious upbringing? And then you hear people's stories. And that's the whole 3-story evangelism, just listening to stories. And then saying, do you mind if I share with you what I believe? Okay. So then you share your story. Now listen, what we talked about last week is so important. As you share your story, it's very simple. You just talk about who you were before Jesus. You talk about how you came to Jesus and what were some critical elements. If you're really smart, you put your 4 points in there. You say, I came to a point where I realized that God loves me, that I'm a sinner, and that Jesus was the only way to overcome that sin. And so I, at a certain point in time, put my trust in Jesus. So if that's your kind of middle point, and then you kind of talk about what happened since. I haven't been a perfect person since. I've made mistakes, but there's been a very interesting kind of I've become more and more like Jesus in the way that I think, act, and react to people. So if that's kind of the second story, then the third story is, can I tell you about the story of Jesus? And that's where you unpack what you believe. And that's why you got to have something ready to go. 1 Peter. Be ready in season and out of season to share the hope that is given to you. So what I want to do on Friday is I want to go through some of these objections, or some of these kind of conversation enders of, well, what about this and what about this, and kind of talk about it. But I do want to keep coming back to how do we share our gospels. We're going to do some role playing, and we'll have our usual cast of characters, but I'd love for you to join us if you can. And otherwise, yeah, I think we covered everything we need to cover, and we'll see you on Friday.